my friend, my departmental colleague, and my collaborator, Brian Hare. He's a professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University and also in the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience. And he founded the Duke Canine Cognition Center. Brian received his undergraduate degree from Emory and his PhD from Harvard. And we overlapped for a while, about 3 years or so, at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig. That's where we started collaborating on phylogenetic psychology, which we called phylocy. We marketed it as phylocy, but it's also known as philopsy among some circles. Not in our circles, though, right, Brian? Brian has many, many accomplishments and interests. It's really hard to keep track of everything that Brian's interested in and all that he's contributed to. Of course, one major accomplishment is his best-selling book, The Genius of Dogs, which is a great book and highly recommended. We're going to hear about his latest book today, but I just wanted to call out that other book. Brian's a great colleague. He's always really interested in what other people are doing and very supportive. And I'll just give one very, very small example of this. Outside Brian's office is one of those large corkboard things. And right on that corkboard is a big Trisem sticker. And I just have to say, Brian, it always makes me happy when I walk by your office and see that Trisem sticker. And he has other centers and other projects of people up on that board. And I think it just is a good example of his generosity and enthusiasm for so many people's different interests. And he does a great job then of pulling together so many different strands from different disciplines in his own work. And so today, Brian's going to talk about the book that he recently published with Vanessa Woods called Survival of the Friendliest. It's published by Penguin Random House, and I'm going to put the link to that up in the chat box as well. You should have been able to download an excerpt from that as part of the invitation to join us today. Okay, Brian, take it away. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Wow, what a pleasure. I have, thank you. I have, what a wonderful, warm introduction, Charlie, and my friend and colleague, and what a delight to be here. I've participated in 2 of these already, and I have to say it's one of the most fun Zoom events I've done is to hang out with this crowd, and I love the format because it's short talks and questions. So I want to get to my talk as fast as possible because I want to make sure that I get through it so I can then hear from you, because I love that about the format. So let me share my screen after just saying thank you, Charlie, thank you, Meredith, thank you all of y'all for showing up, and I can't wait to share a little bit with you today. Okay. All right. So I study animal cognition, and I'm really interested in the problem of what makes us human. And I think the underlying assumption of all my work is really, if you want to know what it is to be human, you need to know what it is to be not human. But today, because I'm with Club EvMed, which I love, what I wanted to do was, let's see if I can get my slides to advance here. I wanted to connect my work to a problem we're all observing, which is a challenge in the real world, which is why is it that there are certain people who are ignoring medical recommendations that clearly, if you would listen to them, could help and prevent the transmission of disease, whereas if you ignore them, you may harm those near you, or you may encourage many other people to harm those around them. Why is it that something that's so obviously good for all of us has become controversial and something that certain people are willing to take on board and other people are using as an example of their identity to ignore? Okay, so that's the challenge I want to take on today. But I want to first tell you about how I think the work in our new book, Survival of the Friendliest, is related to this. But first I want to take you on a short tour of the book and what it's about. So this is the cover of the US book. The book is basically a popularized version of an article I wrote for Annual Review of Psychology in 2017. So you can go there if you're interested in the more scientific version of it. And there's even, if there are European colleagues here, there's a British version of the book as well with a slightly more cheeky cover. Okay. So survival of friendliest, the idea is just the observation that if you step back and you look at nature, even though we have been all trained to think about survival of the fittest, fittest in the popular discourse is often misconstrued to mean the alpha, the strongest group, and that somehow then that strong group has more value, somehow is worth more, or that those that are inferior don't deserve as much or are not as equal. And so survival of friendliness, really our title was to say, wait a second, you're not going to take this core biological idea and misconstrue it, when really in life it's friendliness. When you have a new type of friendliness evolves that allows for a new type of cooperation, you have success, and you can see it all over nature, how friendliness that leads to new types of cooperations is really one of life's best strategies. And so we wanted to use survival of friendliness to sort of help people think about this in a new way. So for you as scientists, my favorite example of this probably is the cleaner wrasse, so depicted here with this eel in the corner, because I find it remarkable. Even still, having thought about it a lot, I think this is the most remarkable relationship, where you have a small fish that should be terrified of predators and swim away from them, actively is attracted not only to the predators, but to their mouths, and they swim in their mouths. They go in the mouths of the fish that should eat them. That's insane. So there's this new type of friendliness where I'm attracted to a predator. I swim in their mouths. I get food out of their mouths as a result, because I'm picking parasites. And a new cooperative relationship has sprung forth. And we now know that these fish have quite complicated cognitive ability. It's really interesting that a new type of cooperative relationship evolved with this new friendliness. All right, so that's sort of a thesis in the book. We talk about lots of different animal examples. And obviously, humans are part of that story, not only as we interact with other animals, but even potentially our own species has a new type of friendliness. And that's what I want to talk about today. Okay, so, but it all got started with dogs, because I think dogs are exhibit A of survival of the friendliest. While wolves are endangered in every habitat they remain in, there's over 100 million dogs today worldwide. Very few species are as successful as dogs. And in studying dog cognition, we made the discovery about 20 years ago that dogs have remarkable social skills for cooperating and communicating with humans. And that's the title, The Genius of Dogs, where it comes from. So I want to show you some data that allows me to sort of make this argument that dogs have remarkable cooperative communicative skills. We tested dogs, a large number, recently on a set of cognitive tests. They're just named here. Some of them were social, and it was the ability to read gestures or to cooperate and communicate and understand what humans want, basically, through where they look or where they gesture. These other tests are tests about the physical world. They're not social tests. And when you look at the performance of dogs compared to 2.5-year-old kids, dogs on the social measures look most like human children. Our closest relatives look least like our 2.5-year-old kids. And then when you look at physical cognition, don't ask your dog to do your physics homework. They're clueless. And it does make it look like dogs really have something special going on in their ability to cooperate, communicate with us. There is maybe a special specialization for cooperating and communicating with humans. So then we started to wonder where that came from. And we've tested dogs relative to wolves. We've tested a special population of foxes I can tell you a little bit more about in a second. And what we found was that the domesticated populations, dogs and a population of foxes that were experimentally domesticated, were better at cooperating and communicating compared to the control line, and dogs better than wolves. So what we think based on this data is that really the special social skills that dogs have evolved as a result of domestication. It's not that dogs just inherited their ability for cooperative communication with humans from wolves. And this experimental line is also able to cooperate and communicate that was domesticated under really controlled circumstances. So let me tell you about those foxes a little bit. It ends up that I traveled personally to work with them in Siberia. In 1959, Dmitry Belayev, Ludmila Trut, Irene Plyas-Nina, and the entire team in Novosibirsk began selecting foxes a population of foxes based on their friendliness towards people. If they would approach and interact with people, if they wanted to play and showed no aggression, they would breed those most friendly foxes together. They've done that since 1959. The experiment continues today. And they compared those foxes to a control line that they have kept the same amount of time and have bred randomly for their interactions with humans. And the remarkable finding is that not only did their behavior change and they became friendlier, but they also had a whole bunch of other changes in their physiology, how they develop, their bodies, their face and their skulls. And when I went and studied them, and I just showed you the data really quickly, the experimental foxes that were selected to be friendlier actually are better at cooperating and communicating with humans and using our gestures than the control line, even though that was never selected for. So all these other traits, body changes, their physiology, their developmental pattern, none of those things were actively selected, just whether they were friendly to humans, and all these changes came along. So in the book, what we do is we basically say, hey, I wonder if we can use these foxes for a model of evolution for dogs through natural selection, just like the cleaner wrats who became attracted to the mouth of predators. Could it be that a similar process happened through natural selection where wolves began to evolve into dogs? And so we look at the changes that we see in the foxes and we ask the question, do we see those same things when we compare wolves and dogs? We do the same thing for chimps and bonobos, and that's together with Richard Wrangham. I began the work of thinking about, hey, if natural selection could do this selection for friendliness, and we might see this syndrome in other species, what about our closest relative? Could it help us explain bonobos and chimps? And again, also with Richard Wrangham, we started to think about what about our own species? In the book, we try to make the case that there is some nice evidence that humans may have experienced late in human evolution selection for friendliness, not unlike what we see in the foxes and the other candidate species. So what do I mean by selection for friendliness? And we've actually called this process self-domestication, because the idea is that through natural selection, you're seeing a syndrome that looks a lot like what we would consider domestication. So the process, the idea of what self-domestication is you have an increase in fitness via friendliness. It changes a developmental pattern and a pathway that then has cascading effects throughout the phenotype. You have accidental byproducts of that selection because of the developmental change. And potentially one of those things that changes is an increase in skill in cooperating and communication. All right, so I mean, the reason the cooperative communication is so interesting is I began at the top saying I study animals to try to understand what it is that's unique and special about humans. The whole reason we were studying gestural communication is it ends up that kids, when they begin gesturing with adults, they start to understand other humans in a new way. They understand that others have knowledge and beliefs, and that they start understanding that others can have intentions and wants. And so all of those sort of theory of mind abilities then lead to the acquisition of language and the participation in culture. So that's why we were studying gestural communication, because it's a developmental marker of the beginning of cultural participation in kids. And so why would dogs have this? And if we could figure out where it came from, it might give us ideas about human evolution and our unique cooperative communicative abilities. All right, so we think that maybe this process can happen through natural selection. We've tried to argue that there are some other candidates out there where natural selection may have shaped other wild species in similar ways. And so we tell that story in the book. But now I want to turn away from self-domestication, which I know I gave you a very quick version of, but I'm trying to watch the clock here and make sure we get plenty of time for discussion. So I want to turn to thinking about, well, what am I talking about with friendliness in humans? Because I think it's important for thinking about human group interactions or intergroup interactions. So I think, and we make the case in the book, that we have a unique type of friendliness, that humans actually evolved a new social category, the in-group stranger. So we know that great apes recognize group members based on familiarity. All I'm trying to say is that humans actually also recognize group members based on identity, a social group identity. They're markers. We all interact with people based on these social markers all the time. And so, yes, we use familiarity. I grew up with you. I didn't grow up with you. I've never seen you before. I have seen you before, just like great apes or other primates and animals. But in addition to that, we can recognize markers of group identity. In this picture, it is, okay, you're painted blue. You're a Cameron crazy. I know you're a crazy Duke fan. And even though I have never met you before and I don't know you at all, I know you're in my group. And we can instantly be friends, and I can care about you as much as I care about even a potential family member. We can bond very rapidly, and I can expand my social network immediately just based on that marker of group identity. So relative to great apes who respond to strangers either with positive or negative valence, depending on the species we're talking about, humans, in addition to responding based on familiarity, we also have this group identity. And when we see group members we identify as a complete stranger, I've never seen you before, but I see that I recognize you have an accent, or you dress, or you wear jewelry, or you eat something I eat. Okay, you're my group member. We can quickly bond and you can become part of my group, even though I never knew you before now. And then the flip side is if you don't have some marker of group identity, or maybe you're from a group recognized as a rival, humans can have a very negatively valenced response. All right. So the thinking is when group identity evolves, and we make the case in the book that it's late in human evolution, we go from a species that has very little group interaction. Maybe you meet dozens of people in your life that weren't in your original natal group, assuming you don't leave and go live in a new group. But maximally you're going to meet hundreds of people in your lives. And I think as soon as you have the ability to recognize identity, meet these in-group strangers, your potential for group interactions in our species goes from something like this, where group 1, 2 interact a little bit, group 4, 5, group 5 is not really interacting with any other group. It goes to this, where now all of a sudden we have markers of identity. I recognize that you're like me, and we can interact in ways we couldn't before. We are exchanging ideas, innovation increases potentially, and the cultural ratchet effect can take off and technology explodes. So that's the idea. And as you have this new type of friendliness, it really facilitates even more cooperative communication in a way where understanding others and being compassionate and having empathy, even for complete strangers, can go to a new level, because when we expand our social network, there's a big benefit. Okay, and the cost has been reduced. So that's the argument in the book about humans' unique type of friendliness. But on the flip side, and this is, again, thinking with Richard Wrangham very hard about this. That's great. Okay, so humans are, and we argue in the book, we're the friendliest species of humans who have evolved. And that's the argument for why our species survives and other human species go extinct. But in reality, we're in a world where there's a lot of cruelty and harm inflicted on other humans by humans. How do we explain that if our species is a species that evolved to be so friendly? So I like to use this metaphor of a mama bear to try to explain the paradox of the fact that we can be the kindest and the cruelest species that has evolved. But because of the foxes, I want to be clear. I'm arguing that the causal error is that we were selected to be friendlier, and that as a result, and what I'm going to argue next is that with that new type of friendliness, there comes a new type of or a new potential for aggression or cruelty. But the causal arrow is that there's friendliness first that then causes a new form of aggression. So like a mama bear, when is it more wonderful to see a bear? When it's interacting with its cubs, it's nursing, it's playing, they're having a great time. Mama bear is having so much fun playing with her cubs. But of course, what also does mama bear do? If those cubs are threatened, she's going to protect them. The worst thing you could do is get between her and her cubs, and she will do anything and take tremendous risks to protect them potentially. So at the same moment, this mother is the most kind. She's also has the greatest potential if she feels that her cubs are threatened for aggression. Okay, so all I'm going to argue is that instead of it just being our family members, that we react like a mama bear would react when our cubs or our kids or our group mates, our kids or family members are threatened. Now in humans, it's anyone who's like me, anyone who we recognize as sharing our group identity. We can be kind and play and be friendly, as I've already made the case, but that means that also when those people, and we can cooperate and communicate in new ways, but that means also that when we feel those people are threatened or our identity is threatened, that like a mama bear, we want to protect those individuals or our group or its identity. And then that what I'm going to make the case for reduces or even ends our ability to cooperate and communicate with those that we feel are threatening those that we care about so deeply. And I think one of the most shocking discoveries in writing the book and thinking about human cruelty is moving beyond the idea that, oh, okay, we have in-group, out-group psychology, but like, what is the psychology? What is the evolved psychology that allows for the worst forms of human cruelty and violence? And so we stumbled upon this argument or this idea that beyond the normal social psychology trio of prejudice, conformity, and authority, there is an even darker force in our psychology of dehumanization. So I want to take a minute to tell you about research on dehumanization, because I think this is one of the core features that explains a lot of why we're capable of horrible cruelty. And I think it's a product of the selection for friendliness and our increased cooperative communicative ability through our theory of mind. So what is dehumanization, or how is it measured, I should say, is this is a study by Noor Tiley of Northwestern, and he just simply asked different people from a variety of cultures, hey, you see this picture, can you just use this to rank how evolved different groups of people are? So there's a list of different people, and obviously what you'd hope is that people would say, oh, everybody's fully evolved, all these different groups are fully evolved people. That's not the finding, though. What happens is, it doesn't matter who you test, it doesn't matter what group you look at, there's a significant portion of adults that will rank other groups as not fully human. This is not, the pattern represented here is not the pattern. It depends on what culture you're looking at. This might be a pattern you'd see in a Western culture. If you went to a Middle Eastern culture, this might be a pattern you'd see in a Middle Eastern culture in response to this question. Okay, it doesn't really matter if you look at different races, different political backgrounds, socioeconomic status. You're gonna, universally what's been observed is there's a portion of people who are willing to dehumanize. Here's a study we did in our own group on kids, where we found that kids 5 to 12 years of age, this is one measure. We had 3 different measures, including the one I just showed with the ascent of man, are willing to dehumanize an out-group member. You just simply ask them, you know, okay, if you were gonna mark where the out-group is or the in-group, just mark which face is most representative. And what you see is a lot of children are willing to rank their out-group group that they're competing with as having a doll face that's completely not human. And this and other measures of dehumanization in children is related to their willingness to share with them, but as we're going to talk about next, also their willingness to punish them. Because what's so disturbing about dehumanization, and these new measures of dehumanization have increasingly revealed this pattern, is that the more someone dehumanizes, the more willing they are to accept harm against others, and particularly other groups of people. All right, so the original experiment and demonstration of this was by Albert Bandura, and basically what he found was that when people dehumanized a group that they were supposed to be teaching, the more their students failed, if they had been dehumanized, the more they were willing to shock and punish them. And as they increasingly failed, they increasingly shocked them, even though clearly the shocks weren't working. The humanized population, the people did the exact opposite. They reduced their shocks as their students were failing and struggling. Okay, so This pattern has borne out in real life, where Philip Goff, Ashley Jardina have been able to show that whether you're looking at the abuse of minors by police, or if you're looking at people's acceptance of capital punishment, when you look at people's tendency to dehumanize, and when those who are more likely to dehumanize learn, for instance, in the case of capital punishment, that minority populations are going to be affected most or disproportionately by capital punishment. The people who are dehumanized more are more likely to become in favor of increasing that policy of capital punishment. And the same for the result with Philip Goff and police, which is that police officers who are more likely to simianize, which is a form of dehumanization. In this case, it's an implicit measure. When Philip went and looked at their records of violations of police standards, those police officers were the most likely to have abused minors and children. Okay, critical to this is that standard measures of prejudice do not pick up these patterns of abuse and violence towards other groups. It does seem that the measure of dehumanization is better at picking up these types of group acceptance of harm and even actual harm itself. All right, so why does this have anything to do with self-domestication and friendliness? Well, I tried to make the case that our cooperative communicative ability is underlied by our theory of mind, that we can think about the thoughts of others. It allows us to cooperate and communicate. As we expand our network, we're cooperating and communicating using our theory of mind with our in-group strangers. But when they become threatened, when our in-group members become threatened, our theory of mind shuts down, and there's nice evidence that the social network in our brain that allows us to see others as human and interact and attribute and have empathy and compassion towards them, it shuts down. And then we struggle to cooperate and communicate with those other groups. And even more scary is the number one threat that causes others to, or causes dehumanization of others, is the perception that your group is being dehumanized. So if you have a leader or if you have a group that is convinced that they are being dehumanized by another group, then individuals are more likely to reciprocate that dehumanization. And so now you have two groups of people who now don't view each other as fully human, and they are not using their full theory of mind, the unique abilities to cooperate and communicate with each other. We know that areas of the brain that are involved in that shut down, and now people are much more accepting of violence and harm towards that other group. All right, so I don't know how I did on time, but I'm back to my mask. The case I'm trying to make is that humans, like other animals, evolved through friendliness, that friendliness came along with it, a new form of aggression that I think helps explain our worst forms of harm and violence towards others. And I think beyond the typical explanations that social psychologists would bring to bear to group dynamics, things like prejudice, authority, and conformity, I think dehumanization is probably one of the, if not the scariest, one of the scariest forces in human psychology, and especially if it's paired with the others. I think that it can explain where we are, and so it is an evolutionary approach that brought me here. I think it's relative to thinking about how we push forward and have people, take the public good in mind when we're dealing with things like pandemics, et cetera. So I appreciate your time and attention and for the invitation, and I look forward to discussing with you and trying to answer all your questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That was great. Do we have any hands raised, Meredith?
Looks like we just had a hand go up from Randy Nessie. Randy, you can go ahead with your question.
Thanks so much, Brian. It's really great to have an overview of all of this. Could you say a little bit more about how friendliness gives a selective advantage? I mean, I've been very enamored of Mary Jane West Eberhard's idea that social selection allows people who are more generous and thoughtful to get better partners, but I'm not sure if that's related to this or not.
Well, I think bonobos are kind of a fun example here because basically the finding is that, chimpanzees have a much more despotic social system. Bonobos, less so. There's no bonobo group that's ever been observed to have alpha male, for instance. And so the question is, well, how can it be that all the male aggression that's been observed in chimpanzees is really not present to the same degree in bonobos? And the argument is that there's an ecological explanation. Bonobos live south of the Congo River. Chimpanzees evolved north of the Congo River, and obviously east and west as well. And that south of the Congo River, there must have been something different ecologically over the last million plus years. And one of the ideas is that resources were just more reliably available, more predictable, and bonobos weren't competing directly with gorillas. There are no gorillas south of the Congo River. And so the argument that Richard Wrangham has made, Alex Rosati has at University of Michigan has tested with me a whole bunch of looking for psychological signatures of this in foraging decision-making between bonobos and chimpanzees. But the argument is that female bonobos could afford to hang out together and form close bonds that female chimpanzees can't. And because of that, they can defend their offspring in a way that female chimpanzees can't, and they form alliances against males who might threaten those offspring. And so your question is, what's the RS benefit of friendliness? Well, the RS benefit is never has there been an observed case of infanticide in bonobos. So female bonobos benefit by forming coalitions to end infanticide. And then because males can't use aggression the same way that they do in chimpanzees, the cost of aggression then outweighs the benefit. And so now you have males that are friendlier actually are at a selective advantage. And then you have added to that some sexual selection going on where females may even have a preference for males that are the least aggressive. So this bears out, actually now there's studies of reproductive skew in both wild bonobos and chimps. And I love the finding because it's sort of fun and counterintuitive that actually bonobos have higher reproductive skew. Male bonobos have higher reproductive skew than chimpanzee males. So that means that the most successful male bonobo is more successful with RS than the most successful alpha chimpanzee.
Hey, Brian, if I could just follow up on that for Randy's question, increased social contact also has costs. And, one of those costs might be feeding competition. Another cost, of course, is infectious disease. And, the cost of infectious disease, if you're spending more time with other individuals, there's of course the transmission from one individual to another directly in something like a measles virus or a coronavirus, but also environmentally transmitted diseases. If you're, overlapping in the same habitat with a lot of other individuals in close contact, and even vector-borne diseases, increase if the number of vectors increases proportional or more than proportionally than the number of individuals. And we've shown in primates that that's the case. So it seems like, thinking about friendliness, you really have to think about the ecology as well of different species and what, how that kind of trade-off between these benefits and costs is weighed. I just wonder if you've given any thought to that and if you have any insights into that.
Well, yeah, I think often what happens is absolutely, if you're going to interact and have more social interactions, you might expose yourself to more diseases. If we're not aware of that now, I don't know when we will be. And so, absolutely, that can be factored in as a cost of sociality potentially. And back to your point about ecology, I think survival of the friendliest is a strategy. It's not the only strategy. But I think, the reason that we're having fun talking about survival of the friendliest is because of the dominance in the public mind of survival of the fittest and the, impact that has had on justifying policies and policy stances because of a misunderstanding. And so we wanted to make sure we push back and try to help people understand that fitness just means RS, and that actually there's many examples of species that increase in friendliness, and win big in life. And so, of course, you know, the bonobo chimp example is a great example where obviously, you know, the type of friendliness that we see in bonobos doesn't pay off as in the same way in chimpanzees, because it wasn't able to evolve. So there must be something ecologically different between the two species that favor the different social strategies. So then the question becomes, well, when, you know, of course, the fun thing is, when does this evolve and what are the costs? And so that's why we have these different candidate species that we're excited about thinking about, where we might see selection for friendliness. I think island living species are really interesting candidates for self-domestication and selection for friendliness. I think that species that are entering into urban spaces are really good candidates. We're really excited to think about coyotes. As coyotes start interacting more, we have some really nice evidence that urban living, this is a study I did with a thesis student, that urban living coyotes are bolder and actually attracted to human artifacts in a way that rural living coyotes are not. And so the question is, are we going to see that self-domestication process over the next, you know, decades unfold? Are we going to start seeing coyotes with curly tails and floppy ears? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. You know, those are the types of, you know, ecological tests we're excited about.
Great, thank you. So we've got a lot of questions, lots of hands raised, so just keep your hand raised and we'll get to you. But next we have a question from Shelley Volsch. Shelley, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, Brian. So I teach a lot of domesticated classes on domestication, looking at how different domesticated animals, their social cognition and things like that. So I'm really curious your thoughts on this attention towards humans as a key behavioral component of domestication syndrome. And then thinking about, as we do increased amounts of research towards the psychology and cognition of other species, the fact that we're seeing this as a marker in cows and things like that, and wondering, you know, some of those behavioral traits that go with domestication syndrome and how we should be rolling or not rolling attention towards humans into that, particularly if we consider a lot of the research now since wolf reintroduction and how their packs are often very similar to what is being hypothesized here about humans, very caring in the natal pack, but potentially more aggressive to threats from outside of the pack. And so I'm just trying to wrap my brain around how domestication may be shifting or not shifting, you know, whether or not that's really the component that's changing the social cognition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, I tried to define what I mean by selection for friendliness and self-domestication. I think there are different definitions. I see it as self-domestication as selection for friendliness that affects development, that leads to a cascading effect in the phenotype. And as a byproduct, you can have these increases in cooperative communication. I think if you have selection for friendliness, selection against aggression, and you don't have those byproducts that are, you know, a consequence of an altered developmental pathway, I don't think we're talking about self-domestication. So I do think it's a falsifiable thing. And then in terms of, I think you mentioned cows, and, you know, I get asked about cats a lot. You know, well, what about cats? You know, what do we know about cats? What do we know about horses and cows and all these other domesticated animals? Do we see increases in their cooperative communication because they're domesticated? The prediction would be that if they were selected to be friendlier towards humans, that there would be an alteration, there would be a change in that direction. But what would be required is, like we did with wolves and dogs, we'd have to, with Charlie here, we have to take a phylogenetic approach, and we want to compare, you know, either the progenitor species or their closest last ancestor, or sorry, closest relative with that ancestor. And unfortunately, in the case of cats, for instance, I can't do that. There is no captive population of the species of cat that domesticated cats evolved from. So if I want to do studies, I'm really stuck. If somebody wants to go figure out how we can do that, I'm excited about it. But you know, and then in terms of reintroduction of wild canids, I think in the case of coyotes, oh my gosh, that is the most fascinating story of coyotes crossing the Mississippi. It's only occurred in the last 50 years. They've expanded to every state, in continental United States. They've intergressed with dogs. They've intergressed with wolves. And there's all sorts of ideas about what those intergressed genes, how they may impact their survival, whether it's disease susceptibility or their interaction with us.
Great, thank you. So next we have a question from Nicholas Trike. Nicholas, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, yes.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation. So I'm an economist working in Toulouse in France, and I work on, in part on animal welfare. So I wonder whether your work could be informative to better understand the behavior of us humans towards other animals. In particular, it seems that we could be very friendly with other animals, but we could also be very cruel toward other animals. In most instances, we are very cruel. So can we better understand this behavior of humans toward other animals?
Thank you so much for that question. If I was gonna feed someone a question, that would have been it. So thank you for asking it. I do think that how we perceive animals is not only relevant to animal welfare, but it's actually critical to how we perceive each other. We've done several studies now in our research group, and there's other research groups actively pursuing this. But the idea is that how you perceive animals, if you sort of perceive them as human-like, obviously a lot of times if you're in the welfare world, how can we have people have more empathy for animals, wild animals, captive animals, because they'll have more compassion, they'll receive better treatment. But what I'm trying to argue is something that we have the data to say that people find counterintuitive. People find it counterintuitive that how we perceive animals is critical to how we perceive each other. And so there are even some manipulations that we've done in our group and other people have done as well, where you sort of manipulate how people perceive animals and how human-like they perceive animals. And you can affect their rates of dehumanization. You can affect also what's known as social dominance orientation, how likely they are to see groups as inferior or superior to one another by manipulating how they perceive other animals. So yes, I absolutely think that theory of mind is the social network that allows for empathy and compassion. It doesn't always activate. We are built in a way so that humans can perceive non-animate entities as having theory of mind. We can perceive humans as not having theory of mind. And depending on when this happens and how it happens, we can be increasingly compassionate or empathic or not. I think one of the big shocks to me is how little research there has been done experimentally on dehumanization. There's a rich history in different fields, very rich history, and people basically screaming on the mountaintops that this is important. And experimental psychologists, people more evolutionarily minded, have effectively, to be positive, have recently discovered this is important.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. Next, we have a question from Ajit Varki. Ajit, you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, Brian, from San Diego. Really exciting, very interesting talk. I had a question about gender. I think you can safely say, I'm not an expert on it, but among humans, males are responsible for the vast majority of physical violence. And so I'm wondering, is the human female the unusual ape? And what about the other apes? What is the ratio of physical violence from male and female?
Physical violence, yeah. So I think if you're talking about physical violence, in-person physical violence, you're going to have a skew towards males. But a lot of...
Not a skew, but in humans, it's like, almost all the physical violence is perpetrated by males.
Yes, yeah, I'm agreeing with that. I mean, yeah. I think the data would likely bear that out. But I think part of what happens when you have projectile weapons and on forward in human evolution is that you no longer have to rely on, your increased muscle mass to be violent. And so as we increasingly can have harm or violence be anonymous, or, if you're going to, I'm sure men and women can fly drones very effectively. So I don't think that, whereas I agree with you that most of the physical violence is going to be perpetrated by male apes. In chimpanzees and humans. In bonobos, we can talk about that. It gets more complicated and interesting. But part of the technological revolution is that it's not basically with projectile weapons on forward, you don't have to rely on that difference anymore.
Yeah, I'm talking about before these tools became available. But in general, my question is whether the human female is the unusual ape compared to the other female apes.
Well, I mean, unusual, that's...
in not perpetrating physical violence.
Physical violence. I would have to defer to other people who are more expert there. I'd probably be getting myself into big trouble if and the reason I say is I can't think of a study off the top of my head where there's a reasonable comparison that I can point to. So I'm drawing a blank, but in terms of bonobos, what's interesting is that it's not that female bonobos and female chimpanzees are more or less aggressive in terms of the frequency of aggression. Often when people hear me talk about bonobos, and I mean in the public, people think, oh, they're hippies, they're peacemaking. And, obviously people get distracted by their sexual behavior. And I always try to make the point, if you're an orphan bonobo male, you do not think you live in a peaceful society. You are targeted with all aggression because females target those males that don't have mothers with any kind of disruption in their group. They target those males. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the frequency of aggression in bonobos and chimps is the same. The form of aggression is different. And then also the lethality of the aggression is different, where there's, no bonobo yet has been observed to kill another bonobo. Chimpanzees have frequencies that can rival some foraging groups. So in terms of male, female, I struggle with humans there, except to say that, yes, I mean, in general, it would be more a male phenomenon.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. I think the next person with a hand raised was Joe Graves. Go ahead, Joe.
Myself. So this has been a really interesting discussion, as you can see from the large number of things I have typed into the chat. But there's an underlying, particularly, and I'm now going to speak about anatomically modern humans. And you did talk about this a little bit in your last response with regard to projectile weapons, but also, there was domestication of animals and agriculture that changed the way humans live. And I think we would agree that human beings, probably more than any other species, have capacities for abstract thinking, which allows them to behave in ways that do not improve their individual evolutionary fitness. And so when we talk about our capacity for cruelty, the motto would suggest that we should never be as cruel as we have been with regard to the possibility of our own individual reproductive success. But in fact, I think because of our abstract thinking, human beings have gone way beyond what any model would predict for their capacity for cruelty and genocide.
So it's great to be. You have written beautifully about some of these topics, and so it's wonderful to be receiving a question. But I didn't know. Did you? I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. Is there a question that?
Yeah, I'm just making a comment about the discussion that's been in the chat, which you probably haven't been able to see.
I haven't looked at it. I'm sorry.
Has been about this question of, are humans that different from other primate species with regard to your model of
I see.
friendliness and cruelty resulting from acquiring friendliness.
I see. Yeah, no, I think we are very, very different. I think we can explain it from an evolutionary perspective. So, I'm not saying that we can't deal with the gulf between human and non-human, but I do think we are unique like any species, and maybe we're, especially unique in that I would make a claim that no species has the ability to recognize group identity. We are the only species that recognizes group identity. So that is a type of abstraction, that we have this agreed way that we recognize each other as one thing. And there's no other animal that can do that. And when that ability evolves, and I would argue it was late in human evolution, and it allowed for intergroup friendship that didn't exist before, and increases and has all sorts of benefits. I don't know about the disease costs, that maybe that's a counter to this argument, obviously, but when you have increased friendliness, you connect innovators. We know that groups of people, especially diverse groups of people, innovate faster. Technology takes off faster. I think that's all because of this new type of abstraction of the intergroup stranger. There's no animal that has that. So not even close.
Well, thank you for your response.
Great.
Okay, we're going to have one last question. Sorry, Meredith, were you about to say something?
Nope, just going to transition to the last question.
Okay. We're not coordinating very well today. I just want to call on one last person. We're almost out of time. Kyle Summers, go ahead. There we go. Kyle, we can't hear you. Let's see.
Hi, Brian. Sorry. I was just curious about your thoughts on intergroup competition. I mean, I think with some other people who posted questions, I'm not quite seeing the connection between friendliness and cruelty, but there is, of course, towards outgroup members. But of course, that does seem to tie into between group competition. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was trying in the interest of time to go quick, and I probably was unclear. So the idea is we have theory of mind. Theory of mind is the thing that develops in all of us between 9 months to 4 years. You go from not understanding that others have desires, beliefs, and thoughts. You think that everyone thinks like you do, and you end up by the age of 4 or 5 knowing that others can think differently than you, have different beliefs than you, and it allows for everything from deception to language acquisition to imitation of others' novel actions. If you don't develop theory of mind, you can't do any of those things. And of course, you can't express compassion for others. So the argument is that there's selection for friendliness, where you're now recognizing intra-group strangers as group members, and you can use your theory of mind towards those new strangers and learn from them, innovate with them, create new technology, and culture and the ratchet effect explodes as a result. The argument is, though, as you begin caring about those in-group strangers as if they were family members, even though you're not related and you just met them, when your group identity or those new group members are threatened, the social network in our brain that we know creates theory of mind, it is dampened and shuts down towards the individuals or group that is threatening your own. And so that then allows for moral exclusion. That allows for you to see other human beings as not fully human or not even human at all, and allows you to do horrible things, cruel things, unspeakable things as a result.
Fair enough. I mean, you're probably well aware that there's a large literature on the importance of intergroup competition and how that relates to those emotions, but that would be a long conversation, so I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk about it with you. That'd be really fun. Maybe I don't know that large literature. Who knows? Because there's so many large literatures.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there at the top of the hour. And Kyle, we'll have to get you up to Duke again soon when we can all travel again up from ECU and carry on these conversations. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Brian, for a great talk. Thank you, Meredith, for keeping things running so smoothly. Before we end, I just want to share with you, well, first of all, I'll share with you Brian's book, the website there, which was posted in the chat. that he wrote with Vanessa Woods. Please pick up a copy of it. I've read most of it. It's fantastic and really goes into a lot more detail on what you heard today. In terms of the future of Club EvMeds, we've got a great lineup. Next week, we have James de Gregori, who's going to be talking about cancer, how recent characterizations of somatic mutations in humans inform an evolutionary understanding of aging and cancer. And then we have Tobias Lenz talking about pathogen selection for HLA, human leukocyte antigen gene diversity, and its consequences for autoimmunity and cancer immunotherapy. And it goes on from there. Dan Blumstein, Sylvia Kramer, Phil Starks talking about a paper he just published in the journal, and Noah Rosenberg. And we have a great lineup already for early 2021. So thank you all for joining. Thank you again, Brian. Great job. And really wonderful to see so many of you join us today. Thanks.